It's so exciting when you get the opportunity to have a conversation in English and actually put to practice what you've worked so hard to learn. But then your mind goes blank. You feel sweaty. The other person seems to feel really uncomfortable and the conversation just doesn't flow at all. You know, I've been there with every single language that I've learned. I still get shy sometimes to this day, and I know it sucks. You're here because you're tired of feeling shy and embarrassed when you have a conversation in English. Or maybe you're even avoiding getting into conversation at all because you're just too scared. Well, in this lesson, we will discuss why you feel shy and give you some tricks that can help you to avoid feeling embarrassed the next time you get an opportunity to speak English. And by the way, to get the best possible experience with this lesson, I highly recommend you download the RealLife English app for free and watch it over there with video, interactive transcript, and vocabulary flashcards so you never forget the new words and expressions that you're going to learn. And there's a ton of them in this lesson. So head over there to your favorite app store to download it or click the link down in the description. It's great to be back with you, Ksenia. I'm raring to go. How about you?
Yeah, me too. I'm so excited.
It's going to be a fun topic today. So I said that I'm raring to go. That means that I am excited. I'm ready. So by the end of this episode, you all are going to be learning 7 tricks that you can use in your next English conversation to stop feeling shy and start speaking more courageously. You're going to get some advice from Leonardo DiCaprio on how to communicate your message confidently. You will also be learning about a challenge that will help you to go from feeling shy to feeling confident in just 30 days and so much more. And remember that if you are new here, every single week we make new lessons like this one that help you to become a confident, natural English speaker. So if that sounds like something that you want to be able to do, make sure that you hit that subscribe button and the bell down below so you don't miss a single new lesson. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else where you are listening to this so you don't miss a single new episode. So Ksenia, I'm sure people who listen or watch this podcast are just blown away because you always seem so confident when you speak English, and it's probably something they really want also for their English speaking. Would you say that you're naturally a confident person, that you never feel shy?
Not at all. Not at all. You know, like people are not born confident, and that's exactly what, like I'm the best example of it. I remember the time when I was a schoolgirl. And imagine like any relative or any friend gives us a call and I pick up a phone and everything you could hear from me is yes or no, yes or no. So basically I was just answering the question. And if we could come back in time and you would tell me that, Ksenia, you know, you would be hosting a podcast in your 30s, I wouldn't believe you.
Doing this podcast, doing content for our YouTube channels, it really helped me to come out of my shell. I think also learning different languages, and I'm not sure if it's the case for you too with learning English, but I would bet that learning English and being thrown out of your comfort zone, having to communicate with different people might have helped you to blossom more out of your more timid nature.
That's exactly the case when they say like, say yes to things that can scare you the most.
For me, for example, if I go to a networking event, any sort of networking event, it doesn't matter if it's in English in my native language or if it's in another language that I speak. I know that I'm not going to have a great time. It's going to be very difficult for me to connect with other people. But on the other hand, if I go to some sort of event where it's smaller groups, like I used to love going to language exchanges, and in those sort of situations, I definitely shined a lot more. Definitely knowing yourself, connecting to, you know, how you are best going to not feel as shy, not feel as embarrassed. That's going to set you up for success, right?
Yeah. Wow. What a nice expression you just used. Set you up for success.
Yeah, if you set someone up for something, it means that you are giving them a good foundation or giving them a good chance of success.
Yeah. I think one of the things that makes you feel shy and even embarrassed when you're speaking English is that you have this fear. And many times we just don't give ourselves enough time to learn about that fear. And I think that's one of the most essential, most crucial things you should do before you try to use some tricks to, you know, gain some more confidence. Remember the last time you were in a conversation and you felt that embarrassment. Just give yourself a moment to reflect on it, where it comes from. what is that? What is the root of that fear? Is it because you're afraid of making mistakes? Is it because somehow you're not so satisfied with your accent and you feel embarrassed, right? You don't like how you sound. Or maybe it's something even more, like even deeper, and you have to work on your overall confidence, not only speaking English, right?
Yeah. At some point, you do need to get out of your comfort zone. You do need to start practicing, just like you said, because the confidence is only going to come out of practice. And you can do things like we talk about all the time on this podcast, you know, speaking in the mirror, recording yourself, listening back to it, all these things, they will help. But ultimately, at some point, you do have to get out there and speak with people. But what you were saying about the making mistakes, the fear of making mistakes, I think that does get to a lot of learners. But it reminds me of a video that one of our team members shared the other day that's pointing out how natives make mistakes all the time. So maybe we can watch that just so that you guys can see that it's not just you. Like, natives also make mistakes all the time. So you don't need to put it on a pedestal so much, meaning that you don't need to make it into this really big deal, because everyone makes mistakes now and then.
Pop culture.
What food is that?
Omelette.
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 I wish we would have written, I think. And thank my English teacher.
I have stolen. I have stolen.
Those are regular verbs. They're tricky. Obviously, these native speakers, they're not beating themselves up. They're not punishing themselves for making those mistakes. I think a lot of that comes to mindset. That's why we have mindset at the core of the Real Life Way, because it's really something that you have to be working on all the time when you're learning another language. And it's something I think you can overcome, this stigma. Do you know what a stigma is?
Yeah, it's just like that fixed belief or fixed prejudice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a negative belief usually in that sense. So people have a stigma with making mistakes when they speak English, but if you make them in your native language, you don't even tend to notice it, or if you do notice it, you don't tend to care.
I believe this comes from our experience as non-native speakers that we got in schools. Like, you know, you make a mistake, your teacher stops you. And especially if that teacher was, you know, not using Real Life Way and, you know, helping you embrace your mistakes, but was punishing you for your mistakes with a lower mark.
All right, Ksenia. So I think that sets a really great base for you guys to think a bit, even reflect a bit, maybe get some paper out, get your journal out, and think why you might feel embarrassed and why you might feel shy, and to work on this more on your own. But I think this is also a great place for us to jump into these tricks that we're going to talk about that can help you in the next English conversation that you have. But I do want to first take a moment for us to thank our Learner of the Week.
So we got a 5-star review from our app user. Her name is 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗶𝗳𝗏. I think that's a female name coming from India. I might be wrong. I'm sorry. Let us know if that's not so. But the message, the beautiful message they wrote us is, if there were more than 5 stars, I would give them all to you. I just love this app. It helps me strengthen my vocabulary and connect with strangers, which builds my confidence in speaking English. Thank you, team.
Yeah, 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗏. So that's exactly the case, right? Is that you need to get out there, you need to get speaking and connecting with people that you don't know, and that can help you to build your confidence a lot. So it's really great to hear that you have had that experience using the app.
We know that many of you just don't feel confident to speak. You speak slow, you feel nervous, and just fail to have a good flow in your conversations. That's why we chose this topic for today's episode. And as you will learn today, the problem is you're not practicing speaking enough, so you never get to develop that confidence you desire to have. Having that in mind, we created a global Speak on the Real Life app, a space where you can instantly connect with other learners around the world for short video calls to practice speaking English together and make friends across cultures. And if you're not feeling confident to do that either, let me tell you, that's okay. To get started, you should actually switch the mindset of wanting to speak confidently to simply speaking courageously. And you'll feel much more empowered to practice every day. And you can do that on the Real Life app for free. Just click the link in the description wherever you're watching or listening to this, or simply search for Real Life English in the App Store or Google Play. Oh yeah.
All right, Ksenia, so the first trick that I want to bring today is to learn the survival phrases. And I don't want to go too deep into this. We'll just touch on it quickly because we have a whole other video that we talked all about this, and you guys can find that linked in the description. But one part of this that I think will be really valuable for most learners is, I think part of the reason we'll feel shy or embarrassed is when we freeze up in conversation because we don't have the word or expression that we need, which actually our app also really helps with that, right? Because you can study flashcards and never forget the words and expressions that you're learning. So you have them available when you have your next conversation. But it's still going to happen that you don't always have exactly the word that you need. And so something that I have found really valuable is a couple phrases. So one might be if you're speaking to someone who also speaks your native language, you can just ask, how do you say, and then say the word in your native language in English, right? And then they can give it to you if they know it. But as English is a global language, it's often going to be the case that the other person won't speak your native language. You're using English as that communication tool. And in that case, you need to find another way to communicate it to them. So what you do is saying something along the lines of, what do you call it when? Or what do you call that thing? So let's say I want to talk about helicopter, but I don't know the word for helicopter. So I might say, oh, what do you call that thing that flies and it has a thing on top that spins? And then maybe Ksenia would say, oh, do you mean a helicopter? And I think when you use these kind of tools, you're never going to be shamed. You don't need to feel bad about doing that because you're keeping the conversation going. You're keeping it fluid, right? And usually the other person is going to then engage to help you because they also want to keep the conversation going. So I think using a couple phrases like that, learning those, having those in your tool belt ready to go. See, I'm a native. I just made a mistake in my pronunciation. Then you're going to feel a lot more confident when you get into conversation because you know that you have what you need to keep it going, even when you're missing a word, even when, you can't understand the other person or they can't understand you. And that's really the whole point, right?
Yeah, paraphrasing is really powerful.
What's the next trick that people can use, Ksenia?
So another trick is using shorter sentences. So again, you might have this feeling of being judged. Oh, I'm an adult person and I'm using those basic sentences, right? Just simple phrases. I should use like more difficult, more complex structures. But I would just want to remind you that English is a language in which shorter sentences are even more natural. So guys, what you can do is start simple and then expand, right? So when you get confident with what you're talking about, when you master the topic, when you've had several conversations on this topic, then you can, learn some more vocabulary and build up. And I brought an example. I wanted just to illustrate it. So a simple sentence you could say would be, I enjoy rainy weather. I like how it makes me think more about myself, about my life. So I get very reflective in this season, right? This is like a very basic, actually like 3 basic sentences. And it's already conversation. You talk about weather. Mm-hmm. If you want to take it to the next level, like making it more complex, you might say something like, it might seem strange, but I really, really like rainy weather. It puts me in this reflective mood and it feels very grounding. So I already used the advanced vocabulary here. By the way, could you explain the word grounding here in this context, Ethan?
Grounding means you have your feet on the earth. It makes you present.
So I could move on, but basically you can even expand, even build up on top of that using more advanced vocabulary, right?
Yeah. It made me think that too, I've met a lot of learners who they try to sound more fluent and advanced by using a lot of very eloquent literary vocabulary and so on, because they think it makes them sound like their English is better. But in fact, it can make you sound really unnatural if you overdo it, if you're making it overkill, which just means that you're doing it too much. You can sprinkle it onto your conversations, but it's like a really nice metaphor is it's like a spice when you're cooking, is that a little bit really can bring out the flavor, but if you do too much, it can completely ruin the plate. And so if you're trying to use tons of idiomatic expressions and advanced words that you've learned by, reading some nice literature and things like this, they can be really nice in literature, but when you're speaking, it can actually break the communication because the other person is having to think more about what you mean. You're using all these words that they're having to really and I've met learners like this, that it's exactly that. They'll even use words that I don't know, that they've somehow picked up somewhere because they think it makes them sound maybe smarter or more fluent, but it's not always the case.
Exactly. And it doesn't help you gain more confidence at all, because when you're using some words that your speaking partner doesn't understand, like there is this barrier in communication and they kind of don't understand you, and that puts you off as well. Like you start doubting yourself whether I pronounce it incorrectly or maybe like I said something wrong.
That's a really good tip, is keep it simple. Like you don't need to feel pressure to use that more advanced vocabulary. There's situations where that's very valuable, but you don't need to build it up too much. All right, so the third trick is to pretend to be an actor. Now, this might sound a bit interesting, but we all know that actors, when they're playing any sort of part, they're acting differently than they normally would. That might sound obvious, but you might have someone who is normally very loud and outgoing who is having to play someone who's more quiet and reserved. And you might have someone who is generally more introverted, more quiet, and they're having to play someone who's larger than life, super confident, super boss, whatever. And you can do the same thing when it's, almost thinking about your English speaking self, your English speaking identity as a role that you're playing. And that role is this person who's super confident. And you could even look to who is someone who you admire for their confidence and even study them. What is it they do? Maybe they, when they're sitting up really straight, they have their arms wide, they're maybe gesturing in different ways. You might even see different body language they use that you really like and you might want to mimic it. Do you like how they walk? Like maybe trying to imitate how they walk and so on. And there's a really nice phrase that we like, right? That's fake it till you make it. So if you start to just act almost like it's this role, it's almost this, you're not even being yourself, you're being this other person, this, maybe instead of being Ksenia, you're the English speaking 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗟𝗃 or something like that. And 𝗥𝗲𝗹 is a super confident person, and you start to play that role, and eventually you'll fake it till you make it. Eventually you will actually start to feel more confident because you've embodied that. And even how you speak and everything, how you project your voice.
Yeah. And it's not about dismissing your true identity, right? It's just playing with it, because what is not yours, you will just stop doing that in a while. But playing with it will help you just open up some new sides of you that maybe you even didn't know about. They existed in your personality, right? You just let them go into the world when you play with it, right?
And if you're an introvert who loves to read and loves to be home and quiet, loves to be reflective with the rain, there's no problem with that. It's not to say like that part of yourself's bad and you need to change, but this might be something that you're wanting to channel, you're wanting to bring out when you get to have a conversation in English.
That's a very great usage of the word channel. Could you explain it more? Because it's like an advanced use of this word channel, right?
People might think of channel like in Amsterdam, there's lots of canals, right? And this is a very similar thing, that if you channel water into a place that you want it to go. And in this sense, you're channeling energy, or you're channeling a certain emotion into maybe, in your outward expression, right? So it's being used figuratively there, but it feels very much like that sometimes. And something that might help you to do that as well is to look in your city if there's like a theater or an improv group to gain some of these skills. I'm doing improv right now and it's just like so much fun. I laugh so much every time I do it. And you could even, if you wanted to do it in English, you might have groups like this if you live in a city, or you could look online.
And speaking about actors, I know we brought today a clip of one of the most favorite actors of many, especially women, Leonardo DiCaprio, right?
Yes, with confidence, for some reason, the movie Wolf of Wall Street popped into my mind. I think because the main character in this is someone who is able to channel much more confidence, and for better or for worse, kind of has this personality change throughout the movie. And it links really well to number 4, our fourth trick, which has all to do with body language. So maybe we can watch that and pay attention to some of the body language that Leo uses here.
Okay, great. Well, reason for the call today, John, is something just came across my desk, John. It is perhaps the best thing I've seen in the last 6 months. It is a cutting-edge, high-tech firm out of the Midwest awaiting imminent patent approval on a next generation of radar detectors that have both huge military and civilian applications. Now, your profit on a mere $6,000 investment would be upwards of $60,000.
That's my mortgage, man.
Exactly, you could pay off your mortgage.
So there's a lot of really nice advanced vocabulary and expressions people probably heard there. Maybe you couldn't understand them. So again, if you're not already watching this on the app, go and check it out there because you'll get flashcards for all these so you can learn them and never forget them. We're not going to define those right now. I did want to point out though, he has some really nice connected speech here. I loved how he said, "Have you got a minute?"
You got a minute?
Which is very common when someone's cold calling like this. Have you got a minute? But he said this as, "You got a minute? You got a minute?" So he dropped the auxiliary, have, and he just said, "You got a minute," but got a becomes gotta. So we have that American T, right? You gets reduced to a schwa sound, ya, and it kind of all connects together. You got a minute.
And it's very, very characteristic of this conversational English to drop the auxiliary verb, right?
So let's talk about his body language a bit. One thing I notice is just how his position in his chair. He's in a chair, and like it's usually more recognizable when people are standing, right? But he's in a chair and he's got a very relaxed sort of body language. Like he's holding the phone with one hand, he's gesturing a lot with the other hand, like with his notebook that he's holding, right? And I noticed too, this is something that I've heard, is that when you have both feet on the ground, you tend to feel more confident. People tend to believe more what you're saying, even. I think there's been different studies done with this. So that can be something that if you're talking to someone, maybe pay attention to, are you crossing? Are you closed up with your body language? Or do you have your arms open? Are you gesturing? Are your feet on the ground, uncrossed?
So he's totally under control. Yeah, he's in control of the whole situation. And he even, for students who are listening to this podcast, they couldn't see that. So I would recommend you go to the app and watch the video that is inside the app. That is our new feature. Not only you are getting the transcript, but you also can watch the video inside the app, so you'll see that and read that body language from Leo DiCaprio. What I liked also and what I noticed is that, this conversation, it's happening over the phone, right? So the other person,
they can't even see him.
Yeah, they can't even see him, but he's helping himself with like gestures. He's very active with his hands. Yeah, so like when you close the deal, he even used this his fist to show that's the best deal. Or when he was pointing it's right now, right? And when he was talking about how much profits they will gain, he said that, your investment will go upwards.
Even using a fist, which is that's like a power gesture, right? You can think of a lot of speakers that will do that.
Yeah, body language is something really huge, and you should definitely use it. We will link one of the videos I brought today for you guys to dig deeper into the topic of body language. This is also called nonverbal communication, because I don't remember the exact number, but a huge amount of communication that is happening. It's not only what we say, it's not only our words, but also our nonverbal communication.
It's the majority. I think it's something like 70% of communication is nonverbal. Then the last thing, which it didn't have to do with body language so much, but that I think was really great for confidence, is repeating the other person's word. So you can kind of hear over the phone that the guy says something of like, "Oh my God, that's as much as my mortgage," which mortgage is actually what you get from the bank. It's like a loan, but it's specifically for when you buy property. And then he says, "That's right, you could pay off your mortgage." So he's repeating back, affirming what the other person said. This is a really great sort of technique, even in your native language, to use, because it shows the other person that you're listening. And if they feel like they're being listened to, they're going to feel more comfortable, which in turn will make you feel more confident, right? So I think so much of feeling confident isn't just about what you're saying, but maybe 70 or 90% of it is just being a really good listener.
But what also helps, it's kind of relates to body language as well, is the eye contact. So when you are communicating, you want to be listened to. Yeah, you want other people to hear what you're saying. And if you're not looking them directly in the eyes, many times, like, you know, their attention is not on you. Yeah. So like maintain the eye contact when in a conversation. That's also one of the pillars of an efficient communication, right?
Amazing. So let's move to number 5, which is having your go-to conversation starters. Something that's go-to in this way means that the thing that you rely on, the thing that you always use. One thing I would recommend for people is if you know you're going to be going to some situation, maybe you're going on the RealLife English app to have a conversation, or you're going to some sort of event where you'll be speaking English, you can think already about what sort of things could you bring up. I know for me, this is useful even if it's an event in English because I am a shy person. And doing that, you can direct the conversation through questions, which are basically conversation starters are usually questions, right? To things that you'll be interested in or that you already know that you'll feel confident talking about. So for example, I love talking about travel. So I might ask the other person, maybe I meet Ksenia at some event, I might say, oh, have you traveled anywhere interesting? Did you travel anywhere over the summer? And I know that's going to lead to a conversation because she'll tell me maybe I've been to that place too. We'll talk about that place, what we saw and so on. So you can see it already, for someone who's shy and, you know, might not do so well in conversation, you're directing it to something that's going to be more comfortable for you. And I could even give a couple examples. So you might ask, what's your story? And this is a very open question. Open questions like this are great because you're giving the other person the opportunity to kind of talk about what they want. Because when you ask what's your story, they could, you know, talk about their job. They could talk about their hobbies. They could talk about what they're doing at the event that you're at. They could talk about something that they're really passionate about. And maybe similar to the example I gave before is, do you have any exciting plans? Like, do you have any exciting plans for the weekend? Do you have any exciting plans for the summer? Do you have any exciting plans for this year? And, you know, again, it can kind of, the person can get into what they're passionate about. And I think, again, it kind of comes back to when people feel like they're really heard, like you're really interested in them. This might be another tip is stop trying to be interesting. A lot of times we feel embarrassed or shy because we feel so much pressure to be interesting to the other person. So stop trying to be so interesting and start trying to be interested, because the other person's going to feel much more engaged with you, which will make you feel more comfortable and confident, right?
Many times confidence also can be quiet. Right? So you can allow yourself to take a pause, to think of a question you want to ask. You also can own your time, like not to be in a hurry. Many times this our, you know, hectic behavior and like unnecessary movements and being in a hurry reveals our insecurity.
One caveat I would give, or like a parenthesis, is try to ask questions that aren't just yes and no questions. Like, for example, rather than asking, do you like the beach? It might be, have you been to the beach lately? Or when's the last time you went to the beach? Or what's your favorite beach? Because when you ask yes, no questions, it kind of just cuts the conversation. You mentioned like when you were a young girl, you would just answer yes, no, yes, no, yes. Which doesn't really create a flowing conversation, right?
When something pops up in a conversation, some unusual response you didn't expect, like stick to that, like try to dig deeper. That may turn out in a beautiful, meaningful conversation.
All right, Ksenia, what's the 6th trick?
Start also with shorter conversations. So it would be a little bit like an interview if you start a conversation and you read all the questions on your list that you prepared. Yeah, it would be unnatural. It wouldn't be a good example of a conversation. So start small. And our RealLife English app is the ideal tool for that, because you can have short conversations from 4 to 8 minutes conversations there on our Global Speak feature, right? And I would recommend that you prepare only 2-3 questions, right? And start with that. First of all, why it can help you gain confidence, because you will have that feeling of small wins. You know that it works. Yeah. So whenever we get this reward, oh, I just had a really nice but short conversation, why wouldn't I try again? When we get success in that conversation, it makes us motivated to try more and try again. Maybe next time you'll talk for 10 minutes. In a month, you'll be willing to talk like half an hour, right? But start small with shorter conversations.
I think too, with what you're saying, is just bringing a couple questions. And you could even, if you're feeling like really nervous about it, you could even practice those questions yourself first, imagining different kind of answers you could get and what kind of things you could say in response to that. You can practice that by yourself, listen back to it sometimes, and then go have the conversation. And that's going to make sure that you feel confidence, because confidence is just practice. Ultimately, it's repetition is where it comes from. All right, the final one, talking about repetition, this is actually another one that would be perfect, is you can do the 100 interaction challenge. This basically means that you challenge yourself to have interactions, which just means that you have some sort of communication with 100 people during a month, during 30 days. That might sound like a lot, but it breaks down to just 3 interactions a day. And interaction, like Ksenia is saying, is it can be something really short. It can be superficial. I think especially if you're, it's your case, maybe you're living in an English-speaking country. I know a lot of our audience has gotten the opportunity to live abroad. This could be a way for you to start pushing yourself to talk to locals and so on. You could do this in small ways, like asking the person, what's the time? Or you could pretend that your phone's dead and ask them for directions to a place. So it can be as small as that. It doesn't need to be a big, long conversation with someone. It can be as small as just asking them one question and getting the response, and that's your interaction for the day. And like Ksenia was saying too, on our app, you can have 4 to 8 minute conversations. So maybe that's your interaction challenges. You want to have 3 conversations a day during a month, and that would just be 12 minutes a day. That's all of us have 12 minutes a day, right? Imagine how confident you're going to feel after having 3 conversations, meeting 3 new people every single day over 30 days. You're going to go from, being that lost, shy English learner, and after those 30 days, you're going to feel actually like a confident and natural English speaker. So I would say that if you're really all in, if you're really committed to feeling confident, doing something like this might be just what the doctor ordered. It might be just what you need.
Yeah, and that sounds so fun. Like you could be, not to say competitive, but what would be the fitting word here?
Yeah, there's almost like the gamification of it.
That's
you don't want to stop going because you've built up 10 days. You don't want to miss on the 11th day.
That's exactly
so you might go out at 10 p.m. and find 3 people to talk to.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the feeling.
And it could be in English. If you're someone who's already shy in your native language, though, maybe you start just doing it in your native language just to get more practice speaking with people, right?
And that's super simple. It just reminded me of how I started learning French. I stopped learning, but when I started it, that's what I had. So I was working at a cafe at that period, and there was a couple who was regular at our cafe. They were French, living in Kyiv, and I saw just a perfect opportunity with that. So I learned like 3-4 sentences, how to take their order in French. So that's how I started. I would just come up to them. I said like, bonjour, ça va? Qu'est-ce que veut? Something like, I don't know, I don't remember now. What would you like to order? I said it in French back then. And they were so surprised. Oh, you speak French. And I said, oh no, j'apprends français. Like I only learned French.
That's all I know.
Yes. And like, it was funny, but they were like, from that day, they started like smiling more, greeting me every day, like, so it broke the ice between us. And it was super simple. Just like, start with that.
It's so nice. It reminds me of this Nelson Mandela quote that's, when you speak to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. But when you speak to him in his language, that goes to his heart. And obviously, all of us are learning English. We're using English as a global communication tool and everything. But sometimes it is really nice to, if you have the opportunity to learn other languages, to get to speak to someone in their native language, because it does, most people kind of like light up when someone speaks to them in their language, right? And Ksenia, that's been our 7 tips, but I believe that you have a quote that is very fitting for us. So let's check out our quote of the week.
So guys, remember that we were talking about embracing your mistakes here, allowing yourself to make those mistakes and learning with them. And this quote just shows you the power of those mistakes you're making. So it goes like this. An expert is a person who has made all the mistakes that can be made in a very narrow field. It is a quote by Niels Bohr, and I really, really like the message behind it. To become a master of your craft, you really, really have to go a long way. And along this way, there'll be lots and lots of mistakes until you reach that mastery, until you become an expert.
That is so true. And as we were talking about earlier, it's like becoming fluent or even a master of the English language is just about making and correcting tons and tons of mistakes. And the only way that you're going to start making mistakes, at least when it comes to speaking, is by speaking, right? So it's one thing, of course, to watch a video, listen to a podcast like this. That can be helpful, but you've got to get out there and practice. You have to actually, walk the talk. You have to actually do the thing that's going to. So I'd say get off your phone, get off your computer, unless you're going to the RealLife app to have a conversation, but get somewhere where you can start speaking right now. And I just wanted to quickly review everything that we learned today. So we talked about why you might be feeling more embarrassed or shy when you speak English. We talked about mistakes, of course, and the quote you brought was just perfect, Ksenia. And some things that you might want to reflect on. So I highly recommend after you watch this to do a little bit of reflection on why do I feel shy? Why do I feel embarrassed? That's also why we have Start With Why as such a big part of the RealLife Way, our methodology for learning English, right? And it's applicable to so many things. We covered 7 different tricks that you can start using today to feel a bit more confident in your next English conversation. So the 7 tricks were to learn survival phrases, to start with simple sentences, to pretend to be an actor, to pay attention to your body language, to have your go-to conversation starters. I love that Ksenia, when I just said that, straightened up in her chair. It's kind of like always
posture.
That's a trigger,
yeah,
right? When you hear body language, you're kind of like posture. The 6th one was start with short conversations. And then finally, the 100 interaction challenge for those of you that are especially courageous. I'd really like to know from you guys, which of these stood out to you? Which one are you going to try? Might you actually go out there and start having 3 conversations every day in English? We'd be super impressed. But either way, let us know down in the comments below or shoot us an email at hello@reallifeglobal.com.
Yeah.
And as always, I want to remind you all that no matter what divides us, be that maybe we're feeling a little bit shy or embarrassed one day, but we can connect, right? No matter what divides us, that which unites us is far greater. It's great having this conversation with you, Ksenia. I had an absolute ball and look forward to seeing you next week. 1, 2, 3. Oh, yeah.
Have you ever wondered if it's possible, as the busy person you are, to learn how to speak English at an advanced level when you actually need to dedicate so much of your free time to work, family, and all of your other responsibilities in life? So for today's lesson, Ksenia and I spoke with real people who have a lot going on in their lives, but somehow they found a way to actually develop their fluency in English.
And she's also come this way from being a learner to